Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street was released in 1984. The movie, of course, is written and directed by Wes Craven. Now, Wes Craven, before he did this movie, he did movies like The Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Swamp Thing, and Deadly Blessings, but the movie also stars Heather Langenkamp, John Saxon, and Johnny Depp, and this, of course, was Johnny Depp's first movie. Now, Wes Craven. Now, the whole premise of the movie is the idea that your dreams could actually kill you. So Wes Craven, he actually got the idea for this movie from an actual newspaper article he read about this kid who was an immigrant. I forgot from what country he said this kid was from, but this kid was having nightmares of somebody trying to kill him. Eventually, this kid actually died in his sleep, and Wes Craven, he tells the story in interviews and stuff, and it's actually a really creepy story, the story that inspired this movie. And it turns out that there were other newspaper articles of cases just like that. So that's actually really interesting, in my opinion, you know, how this movie was inspired by those newspaper articles. But now one thing though, when Wes Craven wrote the script for this movie, a lot of people didn't like it, and a lot of people weren't sure it was gonna work. And I don't understand why, because the whole premise for this movie, the idea that your dreams could kill you, I mean, that's a scary premise in my opinion, because how does somebody prevent themselves from sleeping? Because, I mean, people can go days without sleeping, but eventually you have to fall asleep, and how does somebody prevent themselves from sleeping and dreaming? So the idea of your dreams actually being able to kill you, that in my opinion is a brilliant idea for a horror film, and it's a surprise that so many people didn't like the idea. Even Sean S. Cunningham, who's the guy who produced Last House on the Left, and he of course directed the first Friday the 13th movie, Wes Craven showed the script to Sean S. Cunningham, and even Sean S. Cunningham wasn't sure the movie was gonna work. And no offense to Sean S. Cunningham, but the guy's on crack if he thought that this premise wasn't gonna work. But, you know, the movie, so yeah, the whole premise of the movie is the idea that your dreams can actually kill you. Now, at the same time this movie came out, there was another movie with a lot of similar ideas to it called Dreamscape. And Wes Craven was afraid that this movie wouldn't do too well because of that movie, Dreamscape. Now, Dreamscape actually isn't a bad movie, but it's an entirely different movie from this. So, you know, and much to Wes Craven's luck, this movie was a huge success when it came out. Now, now the movie is about a group of high school students, and these high school students are Nancy Thompson, Tina Gray, is that her name? Yeah, Tina Gray, Rod Lane, and Nancy's boyfriend, Glenn. Now, what happens is Nancy and Tina have been having these nightmares, and eventually they find out that they've both been having the same nightmares. It turns out that they've been having nightmares about this man in a red and green sweater with a burnt face, and he has what appears to be knives for fingernails on his right hand. What happens is, they of course are both shocked and confused that they've both been having the same dreams. But what happens is, Tina has another nightmare about this man, and in the dream she actually gets killed by this man, and what happens is she actually dies in real life. So what happens is her boyfriend Rod was staying over her house at the time she has this nightmare, so you find out that anything that happened to her in the dream happens to her physically in the real world. So what happens is she, of course, in the dream gets sliced open by this guy in her dreams, and then you see in real life she gets sliced open. And what happens is everybody, of course, remembers the scene where Tina levitates off the bed. And that is great special effects work, and this was before the time of computer effects, so that is actually really impressive how they did that effect where she levitates off the bed. But what happens is, of course, Rod is now accused of murdering Tina, and he gets arrested, and of course Nancy is shocked by Tina's death, and Nancy continues to have nightmares about this man, and eventually she goes to see Rod in jail, and Rod tells her that he didn't do it, of course, and he tells her that when he saw Tina get killed, he thought he was having another nightmare, and then he mentions how he had a nightmare about this guy with knives for fingers, so that's when you realize that Rod has also been having nightmares about this guy. So Nancy, of course, is afraid to go to sleep, and she continues to stay up at night, and of course her mother is now really worried about her, and so is her boyfriend Glenn, played by Johnny Depp, and so her friends and family now fear for Nancy's sanity, because Nancy now starts claiming that the man in her dreams is the one who killed Tina. So, of course, people don't believe her, and, what happens is, in the movie you find out that Nancy's mother and father are divorced, and her mother is an alcoholic, and her father is actually the sheriff of the town, who's played by John Saxton in the movie, and John Saxton does a great job as Nancy's father in this movie. He's a really likable character, the character of Nancy's father, but I don't want to give too much away, but eventually Nancy does find out who this guy in her dreams actually is. It turns out that this man in her dreams is actually the ghost of a dead serial killer, who actually killed a bunch of children in the town that this movie takes place in. What happens is, it turns out that there was this guy named Freddy Krueger who actually murdered a bunch of children in that town. He was arrested, but what happens is, somebody forgot to sign the search warrant somebody signed the search warrant in the wrong place, and because of that, this guy, Freddy Krueger, was released from jail. So the parents of the children he murdered organized a mob to go after Freddy Krueger, and they ended up killing him, but of course they covered it up. And Nancy, she finds out that her mother was actually part of this mob that killed Freddy Krueger, and possibly her father as well may have been part of this mob. So she realizes that the reason the ghost of this guy, Freddy Krueger, is going after her in her dreams is because she's the daughter of one of the people who murdered him. Eventually Nancy does figure out a way to stop Freddy Krueger, but I'm not going to give away how she does it, though. But A Nightmare on Elm Street is a classic horror film, in my opinion. Like I said, the whole premise of the movie is, in my opinion, a scary premise, and in the movie, Freddy Krueger is actually really scary. Like, you always see him in shadows, and now, in the movie, the character really doesn't have that much personality. Like, in this movie, you see Freddy Krueger not really as a slasher, but as this supernatural force of evil, and, that's how you see him in this movie. in the sequels to this movie, because this movie had a crap load of sequels, in the sequels they ended up giving the character more personality, but in this movie the character, you don't see him as a person really, you see him as this thing, like this supernatural force of evil, and it's not really revealed till very late in the movie that he actually used to be a human, but, you know, but the movie is a classic horror film. It's definitely one of my favorite Wes Craven movies. It's right up there with The Last House on the Left, The Serpent and the Rainbow, The Hills Have Eyes. You know, it's just an awesome movie. Now, what was I gonna say? Now, Wes Craven actually had no intention on making sequels to this, but of course the movie was a huge success, and there ended up being a sequel the year after this movie, and then a sequel after that, and eventually it became a franchise, but he originally intended it just to be a standalone movie. And I will say that though I do like the Nightmare on Elm Street series, I like most of the sequels. In my opinion, this movie really didn't need sequels, but I do like most of the sequels, but this movie definitely kind of stands out, in my opinion, from the rest of the series, and, you know, all in all, it's a great horror film, great Wes Craven movie, and even if you don't like the sequels, if you don't like this movie, then you're not a real horror fan, in my opinion. So yeah, A Nightmare on Elm Street, a highly recommended movie if you're a horror fan and you haven't seen it. And of course, I'm going to be reviewing all the sequels to the movie, which I have on the Nightmare on Elm Street box set. You know, I won't be reviewing the remake because I don't include remakes as part of the series, but I will be reviewing all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and Freddy vs. Jason, so stay tuned for those reviews, and bye.